And in bringing this panel together, what we have done is we have brought through 3 of our athletes who have taken part, very much integrated as athlete researchers, into the community participatory research project that we'll talk about today. So we have Jacco Arends from the Netherlands, Andrew Hayes from the UK, Sara Isakovic from Slovenia. There are athletes on the panel today, and a very warm welcome to them. We have Professor Andrea Petroczi, who's our researcher, who will give the research angle and talk a bit more around that process today. And we've got our 2 practitioners from our national anti-doping organisations of Sport Ireland and Slovenian anti-doping organisation, Siobhan Leonard and Nina Makuc. So please welcome the panellists to our session today. So we have a number of questions that we've already been prompted from the community, but we want to start with really just a bit of a warm-up question and an open question to all our panel members, which would be, it's a big piece of research. It's taken a lot of time to do this research well. I think that's an important statement to make as well. We've invested effort and energy to doing this to the best of our abilities. What do you think is the single most important aspect or highlight for you personally? And if we start with our athletes in the first instance, what has been the highlight for you? Jacco, do you want to start us off?
Yes, of course. For me, it was the realization of actually how many different views and attitudes athletes have towards clean sports. That was really interesting to me.
Thank you, Jacco. Andrew?
Yeah, it's a huge piece of research. I think you've got that right. For me, I think the headline is obviously that a clean sport isn't just anti-doping. It's more about cheating-free sport, and I think that's a really important facet to consider.
Thank you. If we bring Sara in.
Yeah, I'll just follow up with Andrew. I think it's just so important that we shape what it means to be a clean athlete and have this kind of an identity so that we can help other athletes shape that behavior and promote that kind of behavior instead of focusing on dopers only. But the clean athletes are important.
Brilliant. Thank you to our athletes. And if we move to our anti-doping organisation practitioners, so to Nina and Siobhan. Nina, what's been the highlight or main reflection for you?
From my side, the more surprising thing was that I always thought that only athletes who dope are under pressure. I didn't realize, at least not to such extent, that also clean athletes feel the pressure of being under suspicions of, taking care that they are not involved in unintentional doping and so on. So that was very surprising for me, and it helped me kind of open my eyes that, we have to work with athletes differently, put more focus on the clean athletes, and hopefully in the next few years we could show this during our work.
Thank you, Nina. And Siobhan, if I can bring you in.
Similar to what I suppose the 4 speakers said ahead of me was about promoting athletes and clean athletes going forward. Sometimes I suppose we focus on people who fail the system. So looking at making sure that we promote athletes on their path, on the right side of the anti-doping rules, rather than the other side of the anti-doping rules, which is probably something that a lot of organisations kind of focus on.
Thank you. And Andrea, if we can come to you now as the lead researcher on the project, what have been your reflections?
It almost feels like that I'm giving a summary of what the athletes and the NATO partners already said. So 2 very brief points in less than 60 seconds from me. One is the tacit agreement that lays athletes' discourse about doping being unacceptable because it breaks the rule of the sport they love, not because of the drugs per se. Which raises an intriguing question about the clean sport definition and about the future of or the future place of anti-doping. And the other one is what Nina said is the frustration, the level of anxiety and some bitterness laid bare in athletes' accounts of their experiences. And so it appears that being a clean athlete in the environment when doping is omnipresent or always suspected is not as easy and cheerful as clean sport campaigns tend to portray.
Yeah, and I think building from that, what would you say then, Andrea, if we stay with you at the moment and then open up to the panel, you know, what are the biggest challenges that we face in the field at the moment?
In the fields of sport integrity or in the fields of anti-doping?
And clean sport.
Well, that is a big question. I'm not going to be able to answer it in one sentence, but what I would like to emphasize, which this project was about, is shifting the focus from trying to understand why people dope and trying to stop. So everything is at the moment geared toward catching the cheats. But I want to believe, and I do believe, that the majority of the athletes are not in that group, but they go through the same process. They are in the same environment. I think is one of the biggest challenges is how to have anti-doping that actually supports the clean athletes rather than solely focusing on catching the cheats.
And bringing the athletes into that, as an active participatory member of the team, you were involved in doing the research, in hosting the focus groups, etc. You've mentioned there about the importance, as Andrea said, is we've changed the lens through which we view the matter, you know, away from that anti-doping towards a greater focus around clean sport and engaging in a clean sport conversation. What were the key things that you as athlete researchers took from engaging in those conversations? What learnings did you take away from this process? If we start with you, Andrew.
I think the really nice thing about the way we did this research is I think everyone left the room taking something away from it. Being involved in the focus groups, I think it opened a lot of people's eyes, coming from different sports, from different experiences, different backgrounds in different countries. Everyone left having had a positive experience of being involved in research. From my own sort of eye-opening point, it would be the fact that athletes recognise that clean sport, we're never going to have 100% clean sport. There's always going to be people that push the boundaries, that want to cheat. And even though that is considered that the case, there's still that desire to work towards it. And I think that's really important. So there's sort of a pragmatic realization almost from the athletes that this is a really difficult challenge to deal with, but it's still something that we want to face up to. And it's certainly something that athletes want to be involved with in terms of working with NARDOs to sort of work towards that, or as close as we can get to 100% clean sport.
And Jacco, anything that did you find something similar to Andrew, or were there other kind of learnings that you took from that process?
Yeah, just to add on what Andrew said, I think a lot of athletes can accept that there are a few bad apples that will cheat. But what is really hard to accept is that there are also organizations or state-run doping schemes, or whatever you want to call it. I think that's really a big problem. Also, to the athletes to have faith in the sporting world, or whatever you want to call it. So I think that's a big problem.
And Sara, any points? You know, the focus now in terms of the World Anti-Doping Agency in their new strategic plan, there's a very strong emphasis on being athlete-centered. How did you experience that through this research process? What were your reflections on that element of it being an athlete-centered approach?
Yeah, I thought that was super relevant. I mean, athletes really are the frontline operators there every single day. And I think for me, it was just so crucial to understand, I mean, even from my perspective, but when I was involved in the research, other athletes' perceptions and way of thinking and beliefs and way of behaving, especially in relationship to how they developed their moral values and you know, views on why it's so important to stay clean. And that's why I really believe like focusing on how people acquire that healthy way of thinking is important, just so that we can share that in a more preventative way going into, you know, teaching and raising future generations of athletes. So more in that sense, you know, how they got to be the way they are so that we can help others. Hopefully, shape their way of thinking in the same way.
And Nina, you mentioned it in your introduction around your reflections that it maybe changed your perspective and views of things and prompted you to think in different ways around something that you've been involved in for many, many years. So there is some good learning around that. As your colleagues are all working hard at the moment around education plans ahead of the forthcoming International Standard for Education, they may be listening today thinking, how do I engage our athletes in research and in developing plans and programs? What did you find as some of the, I guess, challenges that you overcame in working with athletes in this way that might be helpful to share with that wider community?
First, I thought that it's going to be a challenge to get the athletes for those focus group and so on. We always thought, we cannot ask athletes to join us or to help us. But then with this project, we realized that athletes want to help us. I mean, more than 50% of athletes that we asked positively responded to our invitation to this project. So I think it was like a misbelief from us. They don't want to have to do anything with us, but actually they are eager to help us because they know that together we can make some changes. So from my point of view, just don't be afraid, reach out to athletes, and I'm pretty sure that athletes will be willing to help you with the programs, with the implementation, and so on.
Brilliant. And Siobhan, your experience in Sport Island was very similar to Nina's, wasn't it?
It was indeed. At the start, we kind of struggled to get a couple of people in the room, and then once we got them in the room, I have to say, the feedback was brilliant, and certainly from our perspective, what it stemmed on, we actually had one or two other focus groups later on stemming from that, because I think the feedback from the athletes was very positive, that it actually caused other conversations in other rooms that actually brought forward other people who were interested in discussing items. So to us, very similar to Nina, at the start, we kind of struggled to get the athletes in the room, but certainly when we got them in, it was extremely beneficial to us. And we certainly learned a lot, and it certainly changed some of my perspectives and, I suppose, urban myths, if you want to call them that way, regarding how we look at the program and things like that.
So there's a lot there, I think, about changing perspectives. And Andrea, if you share with us some of the reflections you had when, you're bringing together researchers, practitioners and athletes in that process, which was a complex and very integrative process of research. How did you marry all of those different perspectives at times, or actually was that not too much of a challenge?
It wasn't too much of a challenge other than the logistics and the language during the data collection. What was interesting for me is when writing up the papers, one of the challenge was that we had so much materials. Actually, the interviews actually produced over 500 pages of text. And there are different ways to look at. So we are still dissecting and trying to write up because we don't want to lose that rich data that we have. So that's a researcher's challenge. What was interesting to me when we were writing the recommendations and the discussion of what athletes said is the slightly different roles we have as researchers, which is we can say whatever we think and feel like, and bring it together with the NADO's perspective that they see their role differently in anti-doping than us researchers, not as much as giving recommendations or suggestions for changes, but to execute what the current system is, and then bring these together to an agreement was a bit of a challenge.
And back to our athlete researchers, in engaging in that process, we asked a question of what is clean sport and what does it mean to you. What other questions would you really like the community to start asking through this mechanism of a participatory process? What would enthuse you to be involved in the future?
Question for me still?
No, if we ask the athletes and then
yes,
Andrea, I'll come back to you. So, Jacco, do you want to, any thoughts that you've had in this engagement? Did it make you think, oh, gosh, I'd really like to ask this question and work collaboratively to kind of come to some ideas and investigations?
I'm not entirely sure if it's an answer to your question, but what I would love to know more about is other cultures. So a lot of the research now has been in Europe and in Western Europe mostly. So I would love to know more about how these attitudes or views towards clean sport are in other cultures, because also it could be really valuable for educational programs to make it more culture specific. So we can be as efficient as we can be.
Yeah, really important point. I think in terms of where the Clean Sport Alliance and the Respect Project, it's emerged from a European perspective, because it is a co-funded project with the European Union through the Erasmus Plus programme. But absolutely, the intention of our team and the broader community is trying to increase the reach, so that we are doing exactly as you mentioned there, Jacco, extending our understanding of what clean sport means much more evenly and more geographically rich. We definitely recognise that is a limitation of the current project, but at least we've made that start, and it's in some ways, Andrew, what are you thinking and reflecting on in terms of questions that you think could be helpful to ask?
I just want to reiterate Jacco's point as well. I think that was quite noticeable, but it looks like it's the direction that the Clean Sport is sort of going to explore in the future. I think the work that we've produced here sort of suggests that this could be expanded beyond just clean sport. There's a whole host of other athlete welfare issues that this sort of route of research could explore and be really effective at finding athletes' experiences, opinions. So I think it's a really sort of fruitful avenue to explore. Going back to just clean sport, I think there's still a huge amount of opportunity to dig deeper into sort of the values that athletes have and how those have developed, perhaps at a younger age, and looking at sort of creating essentially education programs based around values-based education. And I think looking at athletes and almost going back and having more focus groups and looking at seeing if we can get some actual lived experience and using those in our education programs would be really effective, because I don't think there's anything more applicable than actual people's lived experiences in sport. And this has been a fantastic sort of introduction to this sort of research. And I think this is just such a fruitful avenue to follow.
Thank you. And Sara, any questions that you would really like us to pose?
Yeah, I love the whole psychological aspect of, how does an athlete that is clean think about, situations when they're under pressure or they're losing motivation and, or possibly losing a little bit of confidence. How are they able, to mentally power through those moments and, have that level of awareness that still guides them in that rightful, moral, honest, clean direction, right? So it is, for me, it comes down a lot to the psychology behind it all, and how athletes are able to develop resilient mindsets to power through all the challenges that they're going through, and not just come to like pressure or have to take substances. So I like the, more questions on the psychology part of it all.
Okay, brilliant. And Andrea, as an interdisciplinary researcher, you obviously draw from psychology, but obviously other disciplines are informing your worldview of research. What questions has this prompted you to consider that the research community would be well placed to work in this way, to start to bring to life some further lived experiences of our athlete community?
Well, coming forth in the line, Andrew and Sara already took two of my questions. So I'm very interested in how values and value systems change. I agree that values don't change because they are stable, but what is momentary more important, it changes sometimes on a daily basis. So explore this further. I'm very, very interested in along Sara's point of view of how athletes and clean athletes who are pretty much left to their own devices at the moment cope with the pressure, the anxiety, the anxiousness around what surrounds doping today. So that's a very interesting and probably practically useful avenue. And the third one, and I have to credit this to one of our reviewers on the paper, is how reformed athlete, ex-dopers who are now helping anti-doping, define clean sport. I really would like to ask that question.
So the importance there of making sure that we have engagement across all aspects of prevention, that we are targeting our research to reflect that there is a spectrum of prevention that perhaps we've maybe not invested as much attention in as maybe we could do in the future.
I see that with the values-based education, it inevitably raises the point that we have to start it early. It's not when you are 18 and we start talking about the values of sport. It has to be embedded in early life experiences of bringing the introduction to sport rather than an introduction to anti-doping, which again raises another question: is if we treat it as a sport integrity issue, then we will have to start addressing the other problems around integrity, performance manipulation, where is the border between technology helping and gaining unfair advantage, and so on and so on. So there's a lot to do.
There is a lot to do, and I think Nina and Siobhan are probably experiencing just how much there is to do at the moment as they are finalising their plans and getting everything ready for the standard. Any practical questions then that you just want to briefly highlight to us as before we finish our session this morning? Or do you think we've covered most of what you've been thinking about as practitioners in the kind of comments that have already been raised? Nina?
I would just add that somehow include athlete support personnel. We know that these are the persons that are spending lots of time with athletes. So some, research with them might be helpful. How can they support athletes? How could they help them? And so on. So we left them out this time, but I think that their views are also very important, especially because of the time that they spent with the athletes and their influence.
Absolutely, Nina. And we're bringing them in next time, aren't we? So we'll talk about that a bit tomorrow. So very much recognised the role that athlete support personnel play. And Nina, any further points from you before we bring this to a close?
Not really.
Brilliant. And Siobhan, any final points from you?
I agree about the athlete support personnel. As it says in the research, says young athletes trust athlete support personnel because they're probably their peer, kind of their influencers at that stage in their parts of the career. So it's very important that we include athlete support personnel because young athletes put so much trust in the role that they play and their influence on their career pathway.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, a big thank you to all of our panelists who have taken part in the first session of our forum today. This has been very much a team effort in bringing to life this research and the lived experience of our athletes for what clean sport means to them. If you've not already watched the summary video, please go to the Clean Sport Alliance website and watch. The preprint publication is also there for you to read and get some richer insight into that. And if you've got any further questions from today's session, then please contact us through our Alliance forum. Again, just a final thank you to our panelists this morning, and we look forward to further engagement as the forum goes on.